and I'm joined this morning with Erick Reynolds. We're here to talk a bit about future fiber technologies and the Aura AIX platform that we have. So, Erick, would you please introduce yourself, give us a little bit of a background about who you are and your career history today?
Sure. Good morning, Jenny. My name is Erick Reynolds. I am the Vice President of Strategic Growth at FFT. I've just rejoined the company after an 8-year absence, but my security career goes back 25 years. Um, Both energy, physical security, 12 years with FFT, and then also roles within video security and integration in the meantime. In my role, I'm going to be working directly with the team, this sales team directly in the US and working with them in key accounts.
Awesome. Well, we're so excited to have you back. And after nearly a decade away, Erick, what changes have you most noticed within FFT with the technology and where we're heading as a company?
Yeah, well, I left 8 years ago, and the technology has continued to mature. One of the greatest things that we didn't have back then was the machine learning, which really is a game changer. Every perimeter system, regardless of the technology, has some way of discriminating signals, but the use of machine learning to actually classify and give the operator reliability on the system has been really, really impressive to me.
You talk about nuisance alarms and machine learning. How was that different from 12 years ago? Was it sensitivity thresholding? And what does that look like in real life? How does someone who's not as familiar with our technology or pod versus NAR understand what a nuisance alarm looks like compared to a real threat or a real alarm?
Right, right. So nuisance alarm mitigation has always been the bane of any outdoor security system. Someone kicking a soccer ball, or with video security, a tree blowing in the wind. But the ability to discriminate between the different types of events is key. So when you think about sensitivity, which is what a lot of people are looking at, that balance between sensitivity and mitigation of nuisance events. Usually, if you have a higher sensitivity, you are going to bring up some of those nuisance events, and that's usually correlates together. But with the machine learning, it's actually able to not only maintain full sensitivity, but drop those nuisance alarms to darn near zero. And in real world applications, that means that during a heavy rainstorm, tropical storm type thing, you're still able to get alarms on things that are actually meaningful to the security team, while not getting the nuisance alarms that usually overwhelm a system during those type of events.
Yeah, I was trying to explain this to someone the other day, the difference between false alarms and nuisance alarms. And I
Mhm.
explained it like a fire alarm at your house with a toaster or, bad cooking. Every time um, the fire alarm would go off every time you opened the oven. So that's a nuisance alarm because the alarm's detecting something's happening, but we don't essentially care about what's happening there. So
Mhm.
um, we want to filter out those noises. But if the alarm goes off when no cooking's happening, nothing's going on, that's obviously a false alarm. And
Correct.
why do false alarms happen? Are they um, generally like a maintenance issue or an install issue?
Well, you've hit on a good point, false alarms versus nuisance alarms. And the false alarms are an alarm that's generated when no external event is happening. It goes to the machine, if you will. Usually that's a system error. Um, the nuisance alarms are when there is an actual event, but it's not something that you would want to know about. So in real world applications, you would think again about someone kids kicking a soccer ball against a fence or something like that. That is generating some sort of an event, but it's not something that you want to know about. The FFT systems are incapable of generating false alarms, and nuisance alarms are what we're mitigating through the deep learning algorithms.
And do we have any idea what are the most common nuisance alarms? Are they, I'm thinking of perimeters that I know around here, and we have a lot of bird life, and you get
Mhm.
birds landing on fences or pecking at fences. Are these common and seen worldwide as wildlife, or is it more weather events?
Yeah, you hit on it right there worldwide. So different areas of the world have different types of events. Obviously, when you get into something like weather events, that's pretty common globally. But you also have different events. Sometimes in more rural areas, you have wildlife rubbing up against the fence, causing those nuisance events. But the most common we will see is, generally speaking, going to be weather events, the wind and the rain and all of those type of things.
Do you also get, Eric, environmental noises which aren't necessarily nuisance, but part of the environment you're in? So I'm thinking of airports with jet blasts
Mhm.
or heavy vehicles, or if you're looking at a pipeline, just the humming of equipment happening. Would they be considered nuisance alarms as well?
Absolutely, because a plane taking off over a perimeter, either fence mounted or buried, is not an intrusion event. It's not a security event, but it is an event. And that's where the deep learning comes in. That's where the system's actually able to recognize that, but summarily ignore it across the whole system. And that's really where you get that having the faith in the system.
You've worked across manufacturing, integrators, and end users, mainly in utilities and critical infrastructure. When you look at the US market now, current day, where do you see the biggest opportunity for FFT, PITS solutions, and the kind of technology that we deal with?
Yeah. So what I'm seeing within the critical infrastructure world is security in depth. So obviously, there's always going to be a need for video and access control, but that's only the beginning of any security posture. In order to give you that higher security really program, you need to have different technologies out there, and that can be a fence sensor, that can be a radar system, that can be many different things, but getting all of those things to work together in concert. Nobody wants another single pane of glass. They want them to work as a unified, integrated system.
And this is your meaning mainly at the perimeter. So before you get to the building, before you get to the asset, before
Correct.
you get to whatever it is you're trying to protect, you want to detect someone, you know, way out, either fence mounted or covert buried.
Correct.
And do certain applications or environments benefit from a fence mounted as opposed to a covert buried? I guess, you've got the deterrence of a fence and the cable on it showing the fiber. But then if you're having it more hidden, is that your bad actors don't necessarily know that they're being detected? Are there environments where one is better than the other?
Well, absolutely. So, yeah, pushing the perimeter out is something that we're seeing pretty common from their protected asset. But when you're talking about things that are such as more rural areas, that's an opportunity to use a buried sensor, and that even pushes your perimeter further out. Now, if you get into urban areas where you have, I don't know, a substation or something like that, buried system isn't an option. So that's where you have to look at just a purely fence-mounted solution from FFT.
Is that just because of the manual work that it would take to trench?
Well, many times you have these. We'll take a substation for example. It can be in a city, and it's concrete. There's no ground to be dug up to put the cable in.
You mentioned rural settings versus urban.
Mhm.
Something we experience here a lot, and I'm assuming in the US as well, is the implosion of data centers and the security needed to protect these colossal assets. And with data centers, you've obviously got the access control, you've got cameras. Do you think that they're missing anything looking at the wider perimeter slightly further out? And obviously the energy source as well. They're very energy hungry
Mhm.
assets. They rely on a constant feed of energy to keep uptime.
Mhm.
So if that goes down, the center goes down, there's obviously huge ramifications. So is there something that they're missing a trick with not being better prepared from the outer perimeter?
No, I think that data centers in general are realizing that they need to push the perimeter out as well. And you hit on a very key point there. The energy needs of these sites means that substations are in close proximity or even within their perimeter. So they need to be able to protect that as well. And many times the utilities are working directly with the data center companies to make sure they have that reliable power. So it can be working with two different organizations to show them how we can help them with their security.
And when I think about data centers as well, products like Aura AIX, obviously historically or potentially better well known as a PID system, perimeter intrusion detection, but we also do data security, so we can work within the facility itself and protect conduits and that data coming in. Are there other facilities that benefit from that kind of protection from the inside out?
Sure, sure. So, obviously, data security is a huge thing right now. So, yes, what's happening is you can actually use the fiber optic cables and detect if someone is trying to tamper with that, either maliciously or accidentally, thereby preventing any sort of cable cuts or theft of data. So, yes, absolutely, between sensitive sites, we're seeing that whether that's between data centers or government agencies or whatever, even underwater fiber optic cables. We're seeing all these different applications where the technology can be used.
For those who don't know, can you talk a little bit about Aura AIX, what it is as a system, and what its main function is?
Okay, so Aura AIX is a distributed acoustic sensor system. It's a dual channel system, which is important because you're able to utilize a single fiber optic cable and have cut resilience, meaning that if you have an event where something cuts the cable, you're still going to have detection up until that point. And that can be malicious, or it could be a car running through it, whatever it may be, but more of a higher security posture. Using the system for either fence mounted or buried is a common application, but there are also other ones such as data security, physical data security, country borders, all those kind of things.
So you touched on then about cut resiliency. Why would that be important? Are there environments, perimeters, assets where that cut resiliency is far more important than another environment where it's less important? Who's putting the onus on that cut resiliency?
Yeah, it's definitely within the facility owner because they don't want to have vulnerabilities or mitigate as many vulnerabilities as possible. And just seeing a cable there where you have a cut on it sometimes can drop off the system or create a fault within the system. With the FFT distributed acoustic sensor or AIX, it's able to continue operation and location of those events.
And how you mentioned then the location. How close can we get to detecting those within meters or feet or
Within a couple of meters, we can tell
wow.
exactly where the event is. It's pretty precise, and obviously, it works well when you pair that up with your cameras, so you can verify your alarms.
So do they the best way for that is integration. So you've got for example, a bad actor coming up to a fence, cutting through something, and then they automatically trigger the camera. How does that work?
Absolutely. So there's existing integrations written into the major VMS systems out there that are enable the system to the FFT system to direct the cameras to that location for visual verification of what's going on.
And I guess that's important, especially if we're looking at really long linear boundaries, such as a country border or a
Right.
facility that's running for miles and miles long. We don't want to have personnel or security guards set up every so often or cameras using electricity in the field, etc. So is that really important to have that sensor ongoing to provide that information about the site that's not necessarily being picked up by cameras alone?
Yeah, and you hit on a key point there is that this is fiber optic, so it's not powered beyond where the processor is, and you obviously always want to have a higher security posture, if you will. Cameras are awesome; they're a key point component of any security program, but you want to make sure that you're augmenting that with higher technologies as well.
And how does it work in a buried system? So we've recently looked for a customer here in Asia Pacific, and they are looking at identifying and detecting tunneling,
Mhm.
tunneling under facilities. So obviously a bigger problem in parts of the world, less so in other parts. But how does Aura AIX detect tunneling activity, and how far can that reach? Is it within 5 meters, or does the tunneling need to happen right where the sensor is?
It has to be in proximity. So, obviously, there's a certain, signature that or signal that the event, gives off when there is tunneling or digging in that matter, and based on the machine learning, we can capture those signals and train the system and say, "This is what we're looking for digging." But within a couple of meters, you're gonna be able to detect that.
We did a demo with a customer not so long ago, and they had a mechanical digger um, over in, I think it was South America recently, and they had something 50 meters away, and Aura AIX was still able to detect mechanical digging from that far away. And I was curious about how, being so far away, it was able to still get such a clean signature. And they said there was a lot of things to do with the soil type and the ambient
Correct.
noises. So how does the soil type and the environment change how close or far we can pick up those signatures from?
Yeah, you've hit on a good point there as well. Obviously, if you think about something such as sand, sand tends to soak up any sort of an acoustic signal. So that for that kind of event, you would probably have to get closer to the actual buried cable. Um, Different types of soils, maybe clays or something like that, will carry or rocky will carry the signal better, which is why we were able to see it at that distance. And there's a difference between seeing it and alarming on it. Obviously, you don't if someone's doing a mechanical digger that's I don't know, 50 feet away from your perimeter because they're working in the street, you don't want to send all kinds of alarms on that.
Sure.
So you want to be able to reliably alarm on what's important.
So thinking about the applications that Aura AIX can go into, we obviously know because we work in the company all the places that Aura AIX is successful and works. But something we've seen recently, and I'm seeing popping up in conversations, is subsea infrastructure. So how
Right.
important is it that we protect those subsea cables and that infrastructure? And what are some of the common um, activities that damage them, whether that's like anchor drag or obviously there's malicious damage as well. So can you talk a little bit about subsea infrastructure and how we work to protect that?
Yeah, so that's a very vulnerable section of the market out there, and they can be either the anchor drags, which are accidental, or there is, reports of malicious activity as well. And these are very, as you mentioned, not a lot of these things are carrying full internet traffic across seas. So what we're able to do is to use the fiber optic cables that are already laid down there and use those cables and just plug in our system and be able to detect and locate when there's potential threatening activities.
And do you see organizations or sections of organizations such as the military and defense utilizing systems like Aura AIX as a protective first layer for things like this, trying to understand where an incident may have occurred? Or do you think it's more as a backup, something's happened and we'll check it retrospectively?
Well, we definitely have a large installed base within the government, military, intelligence worldwide. And they are definitely looking at creating those layers of protection. The perimeter being that first layer of detection out there. So they've been a wide adopter, and they do understand the threats that are involved that need to be detected and responded to.
And we're looking at other applications. You touched very briefly before on corrections. So historically, I guess we think about our technology as stopping people entering a facility or an asset that we don't want them in. Can it equally be used in the reverse of that? So you don't want inmates or people exiting facilities that we don't want them getting out of.
Of course, and one of the things about the Aura AIX system is that it can be used for not only just perimeter mounted, but also for buried off the same processor. So if you think about many prisons, they'll have multiple layers of fencing. So you can actually put a cable on the perimeter fence, and also off put that cable into the ground, and then give yourself literally a second layer of detection for people trying to leave.
So, Eric, last week here, we had a situation where some trespassers got into a rail corridor and stole some copper cabling. Obviously, copper pricing is through the roof at the moment. So, unfortunately, that's a problem that we're seeing worldwide. Commuters were disrupted. It was a real pain. No one died. Very annoying. But there are environments where having an intrusion or TPI has really serious ramifications. Um, can we think about some of those environments, such as, we look at aviation, for example? There was a scenario in Australia last year where someone cut through the perimeter fence and got onto a flight with a machete, um, and only was detected when on the flight with a machete. So obviously, we think about military and defense, even with data centers and the downtime that that causes economically for businesses and corporations. What are some of those environments where the outcome of an intrusion or a TPI, whether it malicious or accidental, has really serious ramifications?
Well, it's well documented, some of the high profile, if you will, intrusions. You mentioned aviation. There was an event not that long ago in the U.S. where there was a fatality associated with a perimeter intrusion.
Is that was in Denver,
That
right?
was,
Yeah.
that was. But, more widely, I guess, within the electric utilities world, there's very well documented events that have happened there. And electric utilities are a little bit of a different world because the interconnectivity of the grid. So, there is a potential to cause cascading damage. So, the ramifications are huge. Everything obviously runs on electricity, and that would be cause a loss of life for sure if there was something, an event that were to happen.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I always, naturally, I think about someone, uh, a bad actor or someone who's doing malicious damage or an intrusion, but I don't necessarily, until you just mentioned it, then thought about their safety. If you have someone going into a substation, or in this case of what happened at the air, airport in the US, this person tragically lost their life. And if that had been detected earlier and pinpointed, we may have been able to avoid that horrible situation. So um, I think you raise a good point about it's not just about the corporation or the asset you're trying to protect, but also the people who are trying to get into it.
Right, right. Yeah, obviously, there's um, threats to not only the intruder, but employees of the facility,
Of course,
and
yeah.
and the public at large. So obviously, the stakes are pretty high.
Are there any legalities or compliance around having a PID system where it just makes sense to have that extra layer of reliability and assurance further out from your asset so that you can go, we know that we've got uh, almost like a pulse, a good sense of what's happening, a K out, 10 meters out, whatever it may be, but before it gets to that asset or site you're trying to protect.
Yeah, there's worldwide, there's certainly plenty of regulations that call for certain security measures. They don't necessarily call out a technology, but they do call out security measures that must be implemented and maintained, and all those kind of things. But I think when you get into the higher security posture, for sure that they definitely want to push that out.
And we're looking at Aura AIX. Mm, Obviously, it sounds like an incredibly intelligent piece of technology, but how easy is it to maintain? Is that something that our customers need to do? Do we do that? What's the maintenance look like on a piece of tech like Aura AIX or XS or XSB, for example?
So the field components are completely unpowered. No metal, none of that kind of stuff to degrade in the field. So from that perspective, there is no maintenance. You put it in and it just stays there
Just
for
runs.
years.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. The processor, of course, is a very sturdy industrial unit, and has very long life in the field.
So when we're looking at the system and the machine learning and the deep learning, how does that learn your site? If we're looking at a airport, for example, you've got jet blasts, you've got heavy machinery, you've
Hmm.
got vehicles. Is that something that's automatically trained into the system, or is that something that a technician or someone needs to teach the system at the start of the deployment, for example?
Yeah, there is a commissioning process, of
Sure.
course, for the different nuances of each individual site. But if there is something that is creating an event that we hadn't foreseen, it's very simple for us to add that to the library and mitigate that and summarily ignore it.
And is each site very site specific? So if you've got an airport, for example, in Canada that has certain type of jet blasts, or um, a bear or something that runs across the perimeter, can you pick up that signature and deploy it to an airport in the UK, for example, as the same fingerprint type of signature, or are there nuances that means that the UK airport will have different signatures, different jet blast signatures from the one in Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. They have they're very similar signatures, and that's part of what the experience and maturity of the product is that there is a library, if you will, of the different signals out there that create different events, and we're able to implement them on a site by site basis widely.
And the last 10 years of your background have mainly been in energy and utilities.
Right.
Have you experienced over the last 5, 10 years your customers asking for security technology or systems that they weren't asking for 10 years ago? Have things evolved that they're asking for? You go, oh, that's interesting that that wasn't something you had to consider back 10 years prior.
Yeah, I think that, well, obviously security is always evolving, just like any other industry, and there's always the better mousetrap, if you will. But I think that as I mentioned earlier, is they're really leaning on the integration of their products into their VMS, their access control system, and that's definitely what they're sort of leaning towards is making it much simpler for the security operator to detect and respond.
FFT's obviously delivered some huge projects recently, at huge scale in other parts of the world, whether that be in Asia Pacific or in Europe. How key is it for you in your market, specifically looking at the US, seeing FFT deliver at those kind of scales? And how important is that for the US, knowing that FFT's got that experience and that credibility securing borders, for example?
Yeah, so great success with the border um, overseas, but I think that there's definitely. I mean, the FFT is an established company. They've got a large library of different signals, the experience out there in the real world. This is not just a product under development, although evolving. But it's definitely a proven commodity, which is something that's very attractive to me as a member of the company, and also to customers out there in the world.
Now, if there's someone listening to this right now who isn't aware of Aura AIX, isn't aware so much of FFT and what we do, what is the one or two things you'd like them to take away from listening to this that they know about our company, what we do, and how we can help them?
Yeah. Well, the thing that's most impressive to me and really has been opened my eyes is the further nuisance alarm mitigation. As I mentioned, this is paramount. There's a lot of systems out there that can detect events, but the ability to classify and summarily ignore the ones you don't want to is really where the magic is. The machine learning that we've implemented really makes it a reliable system and something that it's being implemented, pretty wide scale.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's it from me, Eric. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenny.
Appreciate your time.